Hi, Steve Adams here. I'm the founder and current president of International Businesses Mission, or iBAM, and this is the iBAM podcast. And today we have an exceptional young lady named Debbie Simmons. She's always ventured beyond the conventional, bravely exploring paths few would consider, from a career in mechanical engineering to graduating from seminary and ultimately founding Anchor Point. She has followed God's calling with an unwavering faith. As CEO and founder of Anchor Point, Debbie leads a mission-driven organization dedicated to helping families thrive through counseling, education, and community support. Her journey has been shaped by her deep relationship with God, which began in her elementary years and has guided her through every chapter of her life, whether through her faith-driven leadership at Anchor Point, her advocacy for adoption as a mother of 9, or her work empowering Christian business owners. Debbie's mission is clear: to inspire others to build businesses, families, and legacies that honor God. Debbie, welcome to the iBAM podcast.
Thank you. I'm excited to be here with you guys.
Thank you so much. Our whole goal is to help people of faith out there in the marketplace running businesses to figure out how to do this, and so, that what I'm hoping to draw from you is some of the lessons you've learned and what you've shared
Mhm.
with your clients. But let's start with a little fun. You adopted 9 children. Let's learn about that a little bit.
Yeah, I definitely did. And it's a truly a God story, but sometimes our lives don't go the way that we had thought they would go. So
Mhm.
one of my kind of crazy deep desires is that I always wanted to be a young grandmother, because my parents were part of very large sibling groups. They were the youngest. And so I really had no grandparents growing up. And I had a lady who kind of came into our life. Her son played football for my dad as a high school football coach, and she adopted us as like grandchildren. And she's the only thing I knew of a grandmother. And I
Wow.
was like, I want to be a young grandmother. So when I was in college and I had met my husband, I knew we're going to get married and all this stuff. I was like, can we just get married now, so we can get started having kids? Because I want to be young. Yeah, I want to be young. I want to be able to run around with the grandkids and do all this stuff
Yeah.
that I missed with my grandparents. And my husband said no. Initially said we had to graduate, and I was like, bummer. And so after we graduated, the long story made short is we started trying to have children and ultimately had trouble.
Mhm.
And I ultimately ended up pregnant with quads. And those boys were born at 26 weeks, and they passed away in my arms. That was 30 years ago yesterday. And that at that moment in my life, this was my plan, right? This is what
Right.
I knew I wanted. And I had done everything to get there, and to go, okay, I'd always wanted 4 kids. Great. This will be great. I'll have them all at one time and be good. And it didn't turn out that way.
No.
So we had to walk through a very difficult time. And I remember clearly in the middle of being in the hospital that night after the boys were born and had passed away, just putting a stake in the ground, going, God, I am going to trust you. I do not know how you're going to fill this hole in my heart for
Yep.
children, because I've tried everything and I just
Yep.
I just don't know. But I don't know anyone else to trust either. So I'm going to
No.
trust you.
Yeah,
So
the
I just
option's no good.
yeah, so I just stuck a stake in the ground, and we went on about our way and started. We learned some key things there, and I think these are things that I apply in life too. Is you know, if you and I spend all our time asking why, then we're
Yeah.
never going to get better. And the reality is, this side of heaven, we're not going to get a satisfactory answer for why. It wouldn't have mattered what God would have told me. It would not have mattered. It would not have solved my pain. It just wouldn't have brought me
No,
comfort, anything. And when I get to heaven, why won't matter?
it won't
Because
matter. And
I'll
those
be with
boys will be
Jesus.
there. The
Right.
boys will be
Yeah.
there too.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I have to be willing in that moment to lay down the why and learn
Yeah.
to ask this question: how do I survive?
Yeah.
Okay. And I learned to survive because God taught me each and every day as I depended on Him. And then at some point, it became, okay, God, how do I not just survive? How do I thrive? And He began to walk me on that journey. So
Mhm.
at that point in my life, I'm an engineer, right? And so everything you can figure out as an
You have to be
engineer.
logical and rational, and yeah. Yeah.
Yeah,
God's
but
everything but that.
there you go. And so we started trying to get pregnant again, and it was too much. I just couldn't do it. My
Yeah.
body was tired. I was emotionally tired, and everything. And so at that point, God called me into seminary. So I walked away from my career, went to seminary, and pursued that. And then we had found a church that I was going to be on staff with. And when we were there, I looked at my husband. I said, "Okay, look, I'm not getting any younger. I had this desire to be young and grandma, and if we're
Yeah,
gonna,
you're all of 27 now, right? Probably.
yeah."
Yeah.
But I'm like, if I'm gonna be a young grandma, we got to get started now, or we got to have a different plan. And so we actually sat down and had a discussion about, like, we could spend all our money trying to get pregnant
Yeah.
and have no success. Or I could take that money and invest it in children that needed a home. And so God led us on a journey of adopting children out of our foster care system. And we adopted 3 different sibling groups over time. So our first one was a family of 5, and they
You
were
went from
fun.
0 to 5 at once.
Well, it's just a basketball team. It's no big deal.
Yeah, right. You
Yeah.
and your husband played zone.
Yeah, yeah. And so
Mhm.
they were 6, 7, 8, 9, and 10. Great kids. But I remember the first night, one of them wasn't, they were in my house. The youngest one, they had been, they automatically were a basketball team. So they played and did whatever. But he came in and he was 6 and he's looking up at me and he goes, "Hey, what's for dinner?" And I looked at this kid and went, "Do you ask this every day? Because I am not prepared for this." Like, I'm not prepared. We've been married 11, 12 years and we're fairly, independent and worked our schedules. And this little kid's like, "Dude, when's it going to eat?" And I'm like, "Okay, I got to have systems. I got to have procedures. I got to get my life in
Yeah.
order,
There's your
and
engineer coming back.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah." So we developed all kind of fun systems, but we brought the 5 in our home. They have trauma backgrounds.
Yeah.
God really just has taught us so much with these children about how I needed to grow and how I needed to trust Him and how I needed to be the parent to the child that He's given me given me as my own. And about 7 years later, I felt like God was calling us to do it again. And so I went to my husband. He was like, "No way. We got 5 kids." And and I'm like, "Dude, I don't know what to tell you, but I'm telling you, you need to start praying about it because we're supposed to do this and we're supposed to have, I think, 4 more kids."
Wow.
And he was like, "No way." And I'm like, "Just pray about it. Just pray about it."
Yeah,
And
just pray
so,
about it. Yep.
yeah. So we started praying about it. It took him about 6 weeks. And he said, "Okay, we can turn in the papers and go on that journey." My kids were ecstatic, but it was interesting because I was so glad that they were really open to adopting. But I was like, "Do you realize, God says count the cost before you do it, right?" And so I was like, "Have you guys thought about like what this means for you?" And so they sat down and they listed like, "Well, it means we'll have to share our toys. It means we'll have to do this. We'll have to help with homework. We'll have to." And my one daughter who played select softball said, "It means I might not be able to play select softball because we might not be able to afford it." And I said, "Yeah, that could be the case." And I said, "What about this? Let Mom tell you some things." And so I just said, "I might not be able to pay for college. I might not be able to pay your car insurance. I might not be able to pay for your car. And are you going to be okay? Oh, and what about a wedding?" I said, "But I do know God will help us figure those things out. But those are things that you might have to step up and help figure the way." And I don't think they understood the gravity of that all, as most of us don't as we go through something. But they were like, "No, we still want to do it." And so God had us within 6 months bring another sibling group in our home of 2. And that was interesting because now you got trauma kids of 5, trauma kids of 2. You got this whole blended family thing going on.
Was it any of it multiracial at all or not?
Not yet, but they will be. It will be. Round 3 will be. So, I mean, but you have the thing where this is my brother. You're not my brother. You can't mess with him. And I'm like, "Okay, you are all brothers and sisters now, and you might not like each other, but you're going to love each other. And we're going to figure our way through this."
Biological siblings have the same issues.
Yeah, so we did that, and then about it was really hard. It was a lot harder than I thought to integrate those kiddos in there. And then I had a daughter who got pregnant. And was in a bad situation with a guy that she shouldn't be with. And I thought that the kid was going to end up in CPS custody. And so I told my husband, I said, "God wants us to make sure we're ready in case we need to do anything with that child. So we need to turn our application in." And he was like, "No way. no way. We sit in bed at night going, God, if you're not real, we're crazy. And so
Yeah,
he's like,
yeah.
there's no way I'm adding more kids. And I said, you just got to pray about it. And it's
Yeah,
a
you just pulled that prayer card again on them. Yeah.
well, yeah, so I
Yeah.
did. But I was like, I just know we're supposed to be ready. I don't know that it means we bring more kids in our house, but we're supposed to be ready in case we need to do something with this grandbaby. And so after about 6 or 7 months, he finally said, okay. And we turned our paperwork in, and I knew it was either we were supposed to bring home more children, we were going to do something with this grandbaby, or there was something else going on. I didn't know what it was. And so,
Yep.
as it turns out, my grandbaby did not end up in CPS custody, which is wonderful.
Good.
We did end up with an additional sibling group, which are African American children. And then we also, that was where I was exposed to a lot of the trauma research that was coming out
Mm.
that revolutionized a lot of what we do in our ministry in Anchor Point and how we help kids with trauma
Yep.
backgrounds and stuff. And so God kind of used that last one to do everything, and bringing those kids in has been fun. But as I shared with you a little earlier, the grandkids now are like great. They're my
Yeah.
favorite. So,
So let's go back, your story about losing those babies,
mhm,
that resonated with me too. My daughter's lost multiples. And
mhm,
so I've gone on that journey with my daughter on it, and how deeply I never understood or realized how deep that cuts until it
mhm,
happened in your own family.
mhm,
Do you feel like for anybody that's listening, that's, really for them to surrender, for most of us, we need to go through some brokenness to get there.
mhm.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, go ahead, unpack that.
Yeah, so I think the biggest deal is that you and I, and it doesn't just have to be in losing children, but
Right,
when
it'd be
we
something
when
else.
when we have a dream or a desire, we have a tendency to hold on tight.
Yep,
Okay. And we have this preconceived notion of how things ought to play out.
right.
And every day, God is asking you or me to let go of our clenched fist and hold them open to Him and go, okay, God, you write my story and I get to go for the ride. And this trust relationship with Him is so absolutely critical. Do we really believe that He is a really good father? Right?
Right.
It
Yeah.
doesn't
Right.
feel like He's a really good father when I'm in the hospital and I'm holding my kid when he's dying. But
Yep.
I will tell you through that experience, it was the most amazing time. I have peace and calm and connection with God that I sometimes desperately desire now. And it was in the depth of
Mm.
that sorrow that happened. But I think what we don't understand in loss like that, or in like even like as I transitioned out of job sometimes, is you and I have a whole year to figure out what a new normal looks like. We knew what normal looked like to us before, but as soon as my boys were born April 1st, what happened right after that? Mother's Day. Great. And Mother's Day is hard. And you go to a church service, and what does the pastor say? Who just recently had their baby?
Yeah, right,
Do
right.
I
And then
stand up?
Father's Day in
Yeah, do
June.
I
Yeah,
stand up or do I
yeah,
not?
right. Yep.
And do people consider me a mom? And so so Mother's Day comes, birthdays come, Father's Day comes. You've got to go through all of those things. And
Christmas.
so,
Yeah.
yeah, it's a
Yeah.
season of learning to like, okay, this is what it's going to be like. This is what the new normal is. It's okay. And God can give me joy
Right.
here, but I've got to learn. So it takes a while. And a lot of people would like for us to be okay, 6 weeks after it's over. And I'm
Right.
like,
In James, he talks about in chapter 1 about letting persevering through the trial and letting it
mhm,
finish its work. And,
mhm,
I don't have that story, but I left a very lucrative corporate banking career in my early 30s to follow what I believe God was calling me to do, and that was to be an entrepreneur. But if I'm honest, my dream was to build a big company and be rich. You know what I mean?
yeah,
And give money to God and do all that.
sure.
And the first 10 years, I had nothing but struggle. And I remember at one point sitting in the parking lot, freezing cold, early in the morning before I walked into my store in Wisconsin in the middle of winter, uh, realizing that I might not make it. And I,
Mhm,
and I had that brokenness moment, and that's not the only one I've had, but it was a moment
sure.
where I was like, you know what? I just got to let this go and trust him, because he's obviously there's a greater work here than what I'm seeing. And that's the point. I just learned recently from a friend, and he gave me a book about changing our posture in prayer from a list of things that we want
Mm-hmm.
to simply worshiping God in prayer and having the desire to magnify Him. And in the book it talks about we spend way too much time praying, keeping people out of heaven, meaning praying that dad will live a little bit longer, all that kind of
Mm-hmm.
stuff. And we don't
Mm-hmm.
pray enough about people who aren't in heaven.
Mm-hmm.
And and uh, and all it's done is open up for me that until we get to that point where we can say we're completely surrendered and we just want to magnify God through our life, and we can pray with conviction, not my will, but your will be done.
Mm-hmm.
It's going to be hard to get to where you got at a pretty young age, which is your true calling.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and that's
And
what
I,
you got.
yeah. And I think this idea of trusting God, we have to grow in that. And that is a muscle that has to
It
be
is.
developed, and it
Yep.
has to be developed over time. And I will tell you, when my children who come from trauma backgrounds have turned 18 and went into the real world, they've done some interesting things. I mean, I've had
Yeah.
kids sell
Right. They're
drugs,
people.
but I
Yeah,
mean,
they're
I've
people.
had ones that sold drugs. I've had prostitutes. I've had drug users. I've had all
Yep.
these things. And if you want to know out of control feeling, it's when you have adult children that are wayward and you can't protect them anymore. And,
Right.
so I learned early on with my kids that my only job is to plant positive seeds and lead a bridge to Jesus and pray for them
Right.
like crazy.
Yep.
And so God has just used that over and over again. So my trust muscle, I've just gotten really good over the years, and I still mess
Yeah.
it up. I mean, at times I'll still find myself going, I wanted it this way. And God's like, you
Uh-huh.
need to be patient. And I'm like, okay, I'm
Oh
going to
yeah,
figure
we're
it
still
out.
learning even at our age, but yeah,
Yeah.
and your wayward kids, they can turn around. They're in a
Yes.
prodigal season and they can come around. And so
Yes.
let's talk about what you do at Anchor.
At Anchor Point, sure.
Yeah.
So at Anchor Point, how Anchor Point came to be, and I will tell you, because I'm the founder of it,
Yep.
is that it came to be because as I went on this trust journey, because remember, I'm an engineer. I went to seminary because God put me in seminary. I'm like, you're
Yeah.
crazy. I'm a woman. How many women
Good
pastor people do you
information though.
see?
Yep.
Yeah, well, and I use all of it. Everybody
Yep.
that ever works for me knows Excel, so they're they're all good at that. But I thought I was going to do church work, and then we ended up moving back to Houston, and I couldn't find a church job, and ended up working for Chuck Colson in Prison Fellowship, running their prison ministry, and that
Yep.
was such a blessing. And I thought, oh, this is a perfect job because it just gives me a lot of flexibility with my kids, and I'm making an impact over multiple states, and God planted a seed in me that what could I do that would be bigger than me and would last way past my time on earth and impact
Yep.
people?
Yep.
And so he began to plant this seed that I needed to do something around this concept of babies and families and trauma and helping them and stuff like that. And I was not a yes girl at that time in my life. So I was like, no.
Yeah.
It took me a while to go to seminary. I was like, no, no, no. And then so this time I'm a little faster, but I still am like, no, 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 no. You don't understand, God. I work in full time ministry. I have, at that point, 7 children. I
Yep.
have a full time mission field in my home.
Yep.
And no, I'm not your girl. I gave you everything. I mean, you have
Yep.
everything. And he just planted the seed, and it kept coming up, and it kept coming
Yeah.
up, and
Well,
it
that's
kept
well
coming
done.
up. Yeah.
Yep.
And I was just like, no, 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 it will take too much time, too much energy, too much money. And so my no muscle's really good, but no, 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 no. And God just wouldn't relent. And I just wouldn't be obedient. And so in a very short course of action, over a week, my job at Prison Fellowship went away
Oh
in
wow.
one week. It was so painful.
He's like, yeah, I'll
Yeah.
show you. Yeah.
Well, he wasn't a mean daddy, but
Yeah.
he
No,
took
I
a
know. I mean, just like
yeah.
I'm gonna get you there one way or
Yeah,
another.
you're
Yeah.
coming, and I've learned that, so I'm a much better yes girl now. But he took it away, and it was so painful. And there was two things as I walked through that. My first one was I wanted my children to know how to handle when life didn't go the way they expected. Okay.
Yeah.
Or they
Right.
wanted. And so I was like, okay, how do I got to walk through this well because this is a living testimony to them as to how to walk through something. Okay. So what we did, my husband and I planned what we call a what's next party. Okay. And we had cake. And it was like a big birthday party cake. I got presents. I got a new briefcase. I got, for such a time as this, a
Yep.
clock and some books on biographies of people that would motivate me, and stuff like that. So we just said, okay, God, we don't know what's going on, but we're going to trust you and help our kids learn how to walk through this well. So it was super fun. We did that. And after I'd been out of work for about a week, God said, okay, do you have time now?
Yeah.
And I was like, yes, I have time now. I'll do what you want me to do. And so I went and talked to another lady that was a really good friend. And I thought, okay, I'll talk to someone and this will go away. And so I talked to her and I was like, hey, have you ever thought about doing something where we help families and this and everything? And we can make a difference for eternity and everything. And she was like super excited and like, yeah, this would be great. And I'm looking at her like, are you crazy? I'm like, I don't want to be doing this. I can't
I
even
was
believe
hoping you'd tell me
having,
no.
yeah, I can't believe I'm having this conversation. And I was like, okay. And I said, so you want to help me do this? And so we partnered together. And I said, this is going to be hard. And, it's really going to test our friendship because at some points we'll disagree. And she was like, yeah. And so her husband and my husband and us were the board of Anchor Point. And so our desire was we wanted to create a ministry that helped families from before the child was born all the way into adulthood to break cycles so that those babies wouldn't be back as clients, from that perspective. And we just didn't want to do the typical pregnancy center work that focused on the front end of that system. We wanted something that was much bigger. That's harder to build. But we would talk to people about it and people would go, oh, we love the idea. We love the idea. We send off our stuff and it was during the time when none of the 501c3s were getting approved. The Christian ones, it was during the Obama administration when that was kind of going on. We sent ours off. It was approved in 90 days. No questions, no nothing. God just opened the door. I'm like, okay, great. And then we had a group of pastors who were very interested, didn't offer us any money, but they were very interested and we'll help, we'll send volunteers. And we called a community-wide meeting. And I remember with my friend, we were sitting there and I was like, who's talking? And she's like, will you talk? I'm like, I don't want to talk. I don't even think I should be doing this. And she's like, you're talking. And I'm like, okay. So there was like 250 people there.
Yep.
And I was like, oh my gosh. And so I get up in front of these 250 people and I'm like, okay, let me tell you the dream and the vision. And I'm sitting here having an out of body experience going,
you're sharing out of your life.
Yeah. But I'm going, I don't even know if I want to do this. And I'm going, here's what we're going to do. We're going to do this. This is going to be step one. We're going to open this center. Then step two will be here. We'll do this. And I went on and on and on. And everyone was excited. The building, the location that we were at where we leased came to us very reasonable. And it was amazing. And God just opened door after door after door after door. And it wasn't like it wasn't hard, but everything that needs to be moved got moved as we were obedient. And so we started that. And some of our people that are really good supporters at the very beginning, they were really funny. They were like, let's see if you make it. So you know how to start up and let's see if you make it. So for the longest time, we funded the ministry out of my personal bank account. And I had just this, but I had this thought I'd just be on the board. Right. Yeah. And we had other things. And so I literally would call my husband and I would go, dude, I just wrote a check for like $5,000 to give to the ministry. And I said, so don't buy anything. and and he's like, okay. And then his next question was, is there any money in the bank? I said, I didn't look. I just wrote the check.
It hurts too much to look. I'll just write the check.
I just wrote the check. I'm just trusting you guys because, I don't know what we're going to do. We're going to be destitute and broke, but here we go. So I would just write the checks. And it turned out the lady that we hired to be the director ended up wanting to spend more time with her grandkids. And so she left us. And so my friend and I were looking at each other. Well, who's going to go in there and lead? And she's like, basically you are. And I'm like, great. So I just stepped in. So then I'm paying out of my checkbook and I'm working for free. I'm not paying me. I'm working for free. And so I knew that we had made it when we were able to sustain, it's so important for you to be able to sustain yourself. And so for us to be where I'm not having to write it out of my personal check to cover everything was in my world, I was like, I have we've made it. We're doing good,
Yeah,
and
right.
so that was
Yeah,
a great faith journey for us. And then, as we were able to build up a salary for the position that I hold, because it's bad for the organization if I work for free and I leave and then you got to pay someone
I
this
agree.
huge amount and it's not built in the structure.
Right.
So we've been very diligent, and God just continued to open doors. And soon as we had our first clients before we opened our doors.
Wow.
And these people who were kind of like, we'll see if you make it, around year 3, they started jumping in and financially supporting and things like that, because they're like, oh, you're going to be here. I'm like, I told you I was going to be here. But okay.
Right.
But
Yeah.
I will tell you, God took care of everything. My husband and I should be destitute and broke, easily, and not once did we go without.
Well,
And
that's his promise. Matthew 6, he's
yeah,
promised. Yeah.
yeah.
Right.
And so we've learned to do that, and I've become a much better yes girl. But our ministry now, is kind of we call it a family network, where we have a medical clinic that works with moms as they're struggling with a decision to choose life for their child. And we do pregnancy
Yeah.
tests, ultrasounds,
Yeah.
abortion pill reversal, those types of things to get in these girls' lives and just love on them,
Yeah.
because most girls don't want to have to choose abortion. They
Right.
just don't have hope.
They
And
know
so,
it to their core. It's not right. Yeah.
yeah,
And then
well,
the difference is, though, you go on a life journey with them where
yeah,
most of them drop off. That's the big difference.
yes. And so, yeah, so women, we can trust, something God taught me is that women are wired to carry. We just are. So even in the most difficult situation, when she finds out she's pregnant, there is a little flicker of joy or hope.
Yep.
And what she needs is a safe place to just vomit her thoughts and think through her stuff.
Yep.
Because when she's using her prefrontal cortex, she actually knows the
Right.
right answer. It's the
Right.
emotions that are
The
getting her caught
lizard
up.
brain gets her. Yeah.
Yes.
Right.
And
Right.
so if we just come alongside of her, we'd love to make her decision for her, but that's not our job.
Right.
This is where we trust, right?
Yep.
We just love her and see her value and her preciousness and the preciousness of the child she carries, and just go, we just want to come alongside of you. That simple, loving step will save 85, 95% of those
Yeah.
kids, especially when you add an ultrasound on. And then the question for the young lady becomes, once she makes a decision to choose life, the next question that we always ask is, you do want to be a good mom, don't you?
Right.
And
Yeah.
everybody says
100%
yes.
on that one.
Everybody says yes. I don't
Yeah.
care what. Yeah, I want to be a good mom. And I'm like, great. Well, then good moms do what's best for the child. So
Yep.
let's talk about that. So then that moves her over to our Hope Family Center, where there is all kind of life on life, what we call case
Yep.
management, that
Yep.
we walk alongside her and baby daddy, because we believe baby daddy is very important. And
Super important.
yeah, and they can walk through that process together. And then if we have a young lady who is homeless, and doesn't really have the support she needs, we run a maternity home where she can be there for 18 months, and we'll work on everything that she needs, educationally, spiritually,
Yeah.
mentally,
Yeah.
physically, yeah,
Yep.
because what we want is we want her to be able to have her baby, and then after 18 or 20 months, let's be able to get you set up where you can take care of both you and the child. So let's talk about a technical, degree type thing. Be a phlebotomist, be a nurse
Yeah.
assistant, something
Right.
like that. So we
Yep.
walk alongside them, but these are also, think about it, these are also trauma kids, right? And so that's very much like what's happened in my home. And then
Yep.
our last initiative is our Hope Community, and that's where we do therapeutic camps for families that have children that are struggling, or just even biologically intact families that are doing good. But that Hope Camp, a Pathway to Hope Camp, generally you see about a year to a year and a half of therapy done in about a week. And so we do it from a trauma perspective, and we are teaching kids to learn how to use their words versus their actions to get their needs met. And the biggest and most important thing, we teach the value of that child to them and see their preciousness, because a lot of them have challenging issues that they've gone through at a young age. But we also bring the parents and the other siblings to camp also, because the parents are what I find are the ones that have to grow the most. They're me, and hey, this is how I have to change to be the mom for this kid. And then we also offer recovery groups, sexual abuse recovery, abortion recovery, just general trauma reboot, and
Yep.
then parenting classes, Does my kid have sensory issues? How do I deal with a defiant child? Infant massage, anything you can think of. So we're walking alongside them all the time going, how can we help you become the person that you need to be? And let's take away all of the, you're not alone. You're not alone. There's people that want to go beside you. So that's the ministry that we've built over the last 14 years for us.
Wow. Well, you're really an entrepreneur who's in ministry. And, one of the things that we see all the time at iBAM is people, they separate the two. Like there's ministry and then there's my work. And what you've shown is how you've integrated those two, because what you do is your ministry, whether it is running an investment banking firm or what you're doing. But you took risk just like an entrepreneur did. In many ways, bigger, because it's, in my opinion, because I've done both. I've built a big company and I've built a ministry. It's really hard on donated funds to build a ministry, especially early on, because nobody believes in it. You don't even know what your model is yet, right? So, So anyway, I just want to thank you for being on the iBAM podcast. I did notice we only got a couple minutes left. It looks like you also help business people too, or some coaching, because I saw on your website. Talk about that for like a minute.
Okay. So what we're doing now with me is we are expanding my influence. And so you can go to the thedebbsimmons.com website. And this talks about how I also invest in coaching other business leaders to see their ministry as their business too, like you were just talking about. And then we are expanding the speaking that I'm doing. We just released my first book, The Heart of Legacy, which you can get on Amazon. And it talks about, living a focused, faithful, and fearless life. And we need to live that way in our personal life. We need to live it in our family, and we need to live it in our businesses. And so that is my calling. In addition to the leadership that I have in place that runs the ministry for me on a day-to-day basis. But that is really if you look at Debbie mentoring one-on-one, that is my gifting, is to say, hey, how can we create more people who are living this out and making these differences? Because you got to live your legacy now. And it follows you and stays, and so if we're not intentional, life will just pass us by. And that's what I don't want for me. I don't want it for you. And I don't want it for your listeners. I want them to do so they can, they can go on there. They can find all about me, the Facebook, the Instagram, all that good stuff is on there. Get the book, leave me a review if you like it. And I love that.
The website is thedebbsimmons.com.
thedebbsimmons.com. Yes, that would be great. And I'd love to do that. If you go on my Facebook right now, there's a great story of my experience on April 1st with the boys being born that they can listen to and stuff like that. But I'd love to connect, love to help in any way that I can to encourage people to be brave and live their legacies because I believe it's worth it. And that's what he has us here for.
Wow. Well, we have very aligned missions about bringing that whole idea of your ministry is your business message. And thank you for being on the iBAM podcast today, Debbie.
Oh, it's been a pleasure. I've enjoyed it.
Listening to the International Business as Mission podcast, a space where we explore how to build businesses rooted in biblical principles that create global impact. But we're not just here to talk. We're taking action to spread entrepreneurship to poverty-stricken communities around the world. Our mission is to be the catalyst that empowers people to build sustainable livelihoods and break the cycle of poverty. We follow the 3-fish principle: give a fish, providing startup loans to empower entrepreneurs. 2, teach to fish, offering entrepreneurial training for sustainable business practices. And 3, equip for disciple making, building a community that supports spiritual growth alongside business success. This is life-changing work, but we can't do it alone. We need passionate impact partners like you to join us on this mission. By becoming a donor, your generous gift will directly fund the establishment of new businesses that provide dignified work and hope. Just imagine, your donation could help a single mother in rural Africa start a small farming venture that allows her to feed her children and send them to school. Or a young man in Southeast Asia to launch a small business, breaking the chains of generational poverty. This is the power of entrepreneurship as a force for good. Will you join us in unleashing it? Go to ibam.org now to start impacting lives through the transformative power of business as mission. Together, we can create a world of flourishing.